Welcome back, everyone. I am super excited for my guest today. I actually stumbled across him through a Facebook group that I'm in called Author Millionaire Mindset. And he kept coming up in mentions, and a lot of authors were absolutely loving his work. He's not only an author, but he has absolutely helped them in marketing. He does courses. He helps people with ads management, and he just knows what he's talking about in this industry. So naturally, I stalked him just a little bit and I wanted to get him on straight away. We have the one and only Nicholas Erik. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so amazed when I stalked your website, and I wanted to know everything about you. And then I was going through all of your articles, and I was so amazed by your in depth understanding of the industry. You were also a writer. So, first and foremost, how did your writing journey begin? What was the starting process for you like?
I got an English degree in college, so I have a finance degree as well. And it really, I guess, came from there. I've always been interested in writing, and then I just decided to write a book. I don't really know what the thought process was there. If I had thought it out, I probably wouldn't have done it, but I think that's the way it is a lot of the time where people take that leap and they decide to write the book. And after that, you have to decide and figure out how you're going to market it, which is a whole nother problem and challenge to solve. And that really flowed from figuring out how to actually get the book in front of people once it was finished.
So, you indie published. What was the first book? How long did the process take you to write it and then to publish it?
It took maybe 3 or 4 months. I might have rewritten it a few times. It might have taken longer than that. It was pretty short. I think it ended up being about 35,000 words. If you're using the definition of a novel, it didn't quite hit that length. From there, things got faster with the writing, but certainly that first one does take a while. And what I recommend for anybody out there who hasn't published yet is get that first book done. It proves that you can do it, and that is irrevocable, and that your brain knows that you can finish. And that's a really important milestone. And all the marketing stuff can seem really complicated before that, but if you get that first book done, then you can get the dominoes kind of falling.
So would you say that you had a bit of a game plan going into it? You sort of had a understanding around the marketing concept, or did you kind of publish and then realize afterwards it was a whole different ball game?
Yeah, I nodded, and the answer is no, I didn't have any idea whatsoever, had nothing. And everybody starts from zero, and some people learn faster than others. I've been doing this since 2012, and it's just been a constant process of learning. And I think that when you're looking at it from the outside, it all seems fully formed. And certainly some people come with business skills or marketing skills that they can apply to the books. But you still have to figure out the nuances and subtleties of the industry and things that are specific to book marketing, what readers want. And there aren't necessarily any shortcuts. You just have to read and be in author groups or read marketing related material, figure out how to get your book in front of readers. And that was a long process. That first book to date has sold maybe 20 copies. That might be generous. I don't know what the final numbers on that are, but was not a smash success.
And I think that too is like for a lot of us who are in it for the long run, it does build and build and build. So the first one, I think we kind of shove in the corner once we published a couple others, like, oh no, don't touch that one, don't look at that one twice. What was your sort of, when you went into it, what would you say that your strengths and weakness that you knew at the time when you went into the marketing aspect of it? Were you easily able to identify those and work on those?
I had no idea. I would say the biggest weakness is I didn't have any concept of book genres and where those fit in. Those are so critical to the marketing process. If your book doesn't fit into a genre or you can't pitch it as a genre, you're going to really struggle, because I thought that science fiction was just this broad genre that I could do anything in. And it turns out that there are so many different subgenres, from space opera to military science fiction to cyberpunk, which is more along the lines of what I had written. And I just didn't really know how to pitch that. And I see that being quite common with not just beginning authors, but also those further along the line. Strengths, you come into it and you think that you know certain things and you're good at things from reading books, but I wouldn't say, looking back on it, that anything was particularly strong at that point. You just learn through trial and error. Just as a baseline skill or personality trait, I tend to be analytical, so that helps in that you try to figure out why you're not successful or why the book didn't take off in the manner that it did. And it can be a long process in that you have to go down the laundry list of things and you're like, I think it's this, and then it's not. I think it's the ads. I think it's lack of visibility or whatever. And you keep going down the list and eventually you reach the reason why, hopefully, or sometimes you can't figure out why. But I would say that genre is going to be by far the number one reason why people's books don't sell. They don't understand the genre within the book, so they're not satisfying reader expectations. And then if they do understand the genre intuitively through reading it, oftentimes that's not reflected in the cover branding or the blurb or anything else to do with the marketing. So you really want to get that nailed down and study people in your genre who are indie publishing. Traditionally published authors, those tend to be marketed a little bit differently sometimes, especially if they're smash hit mainstream big books. But indies really have an understanding of who their target audience is, what their reader wants, and how to deliver it to them.
So, what did you do to gain these skills and this information? Did you do a lot of courses yourself or go to conventions, or was it just a lot of research and networking and hearing word of mouth aside from trial and error?
I've read a lot of marketing books not related to book marketing. I've read most of the stuff that's been put out on book marketing for indies, since it's not a huge canon of available books out there, but mainly just practicing and trial and error. And I'd say if you're going to lean toward one or the other, you want to read some books and then implement. That should be probably 5-1, 10-1 implementing versus reading. And I got that kind of reversed, where I would read and take voluminous notes, and you can insert listening to podcasts or reading Facebook groups or whatever for reading, but you can't just info gather. You have to apply it. And that's where you find what's actually true, because a lot of it doesn't work. It sounds good, but it doesn't work. And B, what works specifically for your books and is a fit for your strengths, your personality, what you're trying to accomplish.
It's interesting too, because you actually wrote a book. You now have two books out that you have published to help people in regards to, publishing and marketing and things like that. What made you decide to actually write one of those books?
I had posted that on my website, and before even that, I'd posted early versions of the individual chapters and sections, pieces of them, on Kboards, which isn't really an indie hub at this point. It's more gravitated towards Facebook groups, but at the time, Kboards was where many of the best-selling indie authors hung out. So I would post on there, and it just evolved. I basically did it to organize my thoughts. There wasn't really any other reason to do it. And those individual posts, some of them were 5,000 words long, 10,000 words long, and then I refined them and rewrote them and posted them on my website, posted pieces on the newsletter, which is my email newsletter, and then assembled them into a book, since people had been asking. And also, it's not really convenient to read them on a website. It's obvious when you're the user, when you go to a website and you see a 5,000 word article, you're like, I'm probably not going to read this. I don't know if this is worth my time. But when you're the author, you're like, of course people are going to read it. It's the same thing with the book. Sometimes you have to try different things to get out of your own head and into someone else's shoes. And you're like, oh, of course, it makes sense for this to be a book. So that took me a while, but I got that out last year and people seem to like it. So
Yeah, I was reading because I was talking. I was reading, there were so many great reviews and ratings on it. Because one of the articles that I actually was reading on your website that I loved was basically how you can hit a USA bestselling list. And honestly, it was probably the best article I've read around this because you really broke it down. And I think a lot of people could benefit about not so much the simplicity of how you put it, but it's easy to read. I feel like other articles or, places that I've read have always overcomplicated, made it very daunting. And you are very clear that obviously a lot of hard work goes into it, but you make it very easy for the reader to understand, which I really, really appreciated. What made you decide to turn this into a business for yourself?
people were asking me questions and people were asking about it, and it just seemed like something that people were interested in. So I ran an ads course a couple of years ago. I did a live ads course and the response was really good, and it just evolved from there. And if anyone's worried about their genre being saturated, or if they're a nonfiction author and they're wondering, hey, what do people want from me, or what do I really have to add to this? There's obviously a ton of content out there, but people are looking for different takes, and they'll connect with certain authors and won't connect with other material. And there's certainly a ton of ad courses out there, but my approach is based on just working with a lot of different authors. At the time, I'd worked with a few. Now I've worked with many different authors, and that provides something that people can't necessarily get elsewhere. And it's really hard to get out of your own head with the marketing and see what your strengths are, what you bring to the table. And there are a lot of reasons not to do anything, not to make that Facebook post, or not to create a Facebook ad, or whatever you're doing to push your books. But most of those are just holding you back or keeping you in place. And if you can convince yourself to take action with the marketing, then usually a lot of good things happen. So that's probably something like the book last year that was fairly obvious to do, but it took me a while to get around to actually implementing that.
You raise such good points too, because I think especially for those authors who have been in the industry for a while, they become very stagnant. They don't know how to break out of that. And that's because they've created like a habit and a pattern. When they have a release, they're doing the same things. And though they might say, oh, but I tried this time, they might have just tried a different PR company and it didn't bring in the results. And they're like, oh, well, that was me trying something different. So I think your approach is brilliant in the way that it's creating a long-lasting sort of, this is what you need to do. You need to create new habits, such as ads, because I know a lot of authors are highly intimidated because they don't even know where to start. You've mentioned a lot Facebook ads, which I do want to get into, but do you do ads anywhere else like AMS, or do you focus?
My focus now is mainly on Amazon ads and some Bookbub ads, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. I'd say Facebook, if you're a romance author, is going to perform the best. Amazon, it's a lot of spreadsheets, and if you're more analytical, then that might be a good fit for you. Bookbub is something that you can use with discounted books. It's less effective for full price books, in that it just doesn't have the same user base as Amazon and Facebook, which are trillion-dollar companies or close to it. And that means that you just don't have the opportunity to spend as much money there, but certainly you can spend hundreds of dollars effectively there, thousands, for a larger campaign.
Yeah. One thing I personally enjoy about AMS ads is it helps to, if you are a particular author who doesn't know what authors to compare your book to, I feel like if you do AMS ads, you're going to find out very quickly. If you do sort of a bit of a blanket, which I would not run for too long, just because it'll chew up your money, but you see very quickly what clicks are going, like what people are gravitating towards your books, and what author they're coming off. So what would your top tips perhaps be for AMS ads?
The first one would probably be to learn Excel or Google Sheets. That's not really an easy hack or anything like that. And it's probably not at the top of anyone's list, but that is going to save you so much time and allow you to analyze things in much greater detail. And then the other thing that I'd recommend is make sure your targeting is really focused. I think people shotgun that out too wide. If you have a vampire romance, you obviously shouldn't be targeting contemporary romantic comedies, but you should really niche that down and figure out what type of vampire romance it's similar to. Does it have those magical elements, or is it more of a just paranormal without the magical elements? And find books that are similar to try to target if you're doing the keyword targeting or ASIN targeting. And that helps significantly with the conversion and overall performance. And the other thing is you got to turn off keywords and ASINs if you're targeting via that you're not converting for. People just let their campaigns run, and they let these huge campaigns with hundreds of keywords in them run. You don't need hundreds of keywords. You're better off starting with 15, 20, 25 that you handpicked and see how they do. Finally, if you're running auto ads or category ads, which Amazon handles the targeting, it's automated, you need to negative target terms that aren't converting. Otherwise, it's going to just show up and waste your ad spend for a ton of different stuff. So it's tricky because you don't want to negative target something that only has one click and no sales. You don't have enough data there. But if something has, say, 10, 15 clicks and no sales or no pages read, you probably want to negative target that. From the start with those auto and category ads, I usually negative target the word free as a phrase match. I usually negative target prime as a phrase match, and audio as well. Those terms in all the reports that I've seen, they don't convert well. The cost is enormous because people are looking for free books, or they're looking for something in prime reading that's not in prime reading. Even if your book is in prime reading, I probably wouldn't target that, or I'd separate it out into its own campaign so you can control it, because it can spend a lot of money really fast. Audio, a lot of people don't have audiobooks. If you do have an audiobook, Amazon Ads can't track it. They don't track those audio sales on the dashboard, and Amazon Ads tend to be fairly pricey on a cost per click basis. So I don't want to be blind there as to, is my audio converting from the ads? Is it not? There's no way for me to know. So I'm not going to pay 75 cents dollar a click for that. And that can shave off probably about somewhere between 15 to 25% of your wasted ad spend. And that's substantial, especially as you're scaling up. That can be thousands of dollars a month.
Yeah, that's amazing. My next question then would be the difference in Facebook, because I know that a lot of authors are kind of, I go for Amazon or I go for Facebook. They've either had luck on one or the other. What would your recommendations for Facebook ads be?
With Facebook ads, the number one thing is you have to remember that Facebook, you can advertise anything. Your ad could be for a skincare cream. It could be for a dating website. They don't know that it is a book. You need to make it really clear that it's a book. That's number one. And the way you do that with the creative is you have the book cover on the book background with the book blurb. That's my go-to for Facebook ads at the start. And that really solves a lot of those problems. And then number two, what I like to do instead of writing teasers and trying to come up with different copy ideas is use excerpts from your book. You've already written that. It's going to hit the genre notes. It's going to have conflict built in. It's going to introduce the main character or the main characters if you're writing a romance. And that is the best showcase to attract readers who are interested in that type of book. If they read to the end of the excerpt, and it can be long or short, then they're going to be emotionally invested, and that's pretty powerful when they click over to Amazon. And people who aren't interested in books or aren't interested in that style or tone, they're not going to buy the book, which is fine. That's absolutely what you want. You only want to get it in front of people who are likely to buy it and likely to enjoy it, because it's not just about closing that one sale. your career is built on repeat readers who stick with you for 5, 10 years. And that's really what you're aiming for when you're generating sales. How can I find those readers who are going to be my fans for future books and buy my books on release day, buy my backlist titles? And that's where the real power of advertising lies.
So, in regards to readers, what would there be any funnels that you would recommend in regards to obviously the process? So, we've gone from Facebook, they've gone to Amazon, they've read the book, they love the book. What would you say, what would your recommendations be to keep them in the loop? You know, are you all for newsletters, the Facebook separate groups for readers? What do you think is the most powerful to keep your reader constantly engaged with you?
Social is going to be useful if you like social. If you don't, then you can have a presence there or you can pretty much ignore it. It's really up to you, but that can be effective. If you're already a Facebook user, you know that you like posting on Facebook. That's a natural extension of what you do, and you also understand the environment. Likewise with Instagram or TikTok or whatever social media platform it is. If you don't like that, then you're not going to do it with consistency. You're not going to really learn what's going on that's most effective on those platforms, and it's going to be hard to really stand out in all the content. The newsletter is mandatory for all fiction authors. It's your direct conduit to readers. As for the cadence, you can do one of three basic options. You can do it weekly, you can do it monthly, and then you can do it as needed or release only. A lot of people tend to do just that third option where they send it out on new releases. Readers, when they sign up for your newsletter, they signed up because they like your books, but the books are an extension of you, and they're probably interested in hearing about what went into the books, updates on the books, whatever you can put into your weekly newsletter. The format is really up to you. So weekly or monthly keeps them engaged, and it reminds them that a new book is coming and that you exist. There's a lot of content out there. It's really hard to remember, hey, I liked that book 4 months ago. What was that author's name? Even if they loved it, especially if they read it in Kindle Unlimited, because then it's not going to be on their Kindle because you have to return them to the store. So that can just kind of dissolve into the ether. And if you email them at that point, then they might not even remember signing up for your list. So having some sort of constant communication, or I should say consistent communication, is key. And people are very worried that they're going to annoy readers. If someone's annoyed or someone doesn't want to be there, they're just going to unsubscribe. It's not a big deal. Once a week is not a very frequent cadence. Do a search in your email inbox for Netflix or HBO or any of those streaming services that you subscribe to. If you haven't unsubscribed from their emails, and you'll see that they contact you 10, 15 times a month. It's not annoying because that content is relevant to you. It includes shows that you're probably watching right now, shows that are similar to ones that you've liked in the past, and that makes it interesting, and people will be interested to hear about your books because it's relevant to the book or books that they've enjoyed in the past.
Yeah, I'm a little bit curious what your thoughts are on the good old debate. And obviously, both options have their benefits. Are you for Kindle Unlimited or are you for wide?
It really depends on probably the genre and your strategy. So it's a pretty deep rabbit hole, but certain Kindle Unlimited genres are things like lit RPG. You only really see that in Kindle Unlimited. It's dominated by Kindle Unlimited, and that means it's kind of your only option there. I'm sure there's someone who's wide with that, but that kind of makes the decision for you. Where you have to make that choice is when you can publish wide, but it might be weighted towards Kindle Unlimited, say urban fantasy, which is what I write. Most of the indie stuff is in Kindle Unlimited, but there are some wide authors. Obviously, the traditionally published stuff is going to be wide. And then you have a decision to make. And sometimes your books just don't resonate in Kindle Unlimited, or they don't resonate wide. Maybe they're a better fit for Kindle Unlimited. And you want to look at the numbers. You also want to look at how much time is this going to take me? Wide is a longer process. You have to be more patient to see results. Probably not going to be able to build something substantial in less than 6 months, even if you're established. Maybe you can get things rolling faster than that, but it's often this slow process where you have to build a reader base on Kobo, Google Play, Apple Books, just like you did on Amazon. So that can be jarring from someone who no longer is getting that Kindle Unlimited revenue. And you really want to just look at the genre, see what's common, and then I would try Kindle Unlimited if you're a new author for the first 90 days because it's just easy. It streamlines a lot of the process. They give you some marketing tools like free runs and Kindle Countdown deals that can really help gain some visibility and then see where you're at. If you want to go wide at that point, then you can do it. But make it as a calculated decision where you're basing it on numbers rather than an emotional decision.
And I think too that is a lot of where people find that they can't make much progress is because they are reacting emotionally. I've been guilty of this in the past, and you're just like, oh, this isn't working. I need to quickly change it to this different tactic. And because you're jumping around too much, then nothing comes in effect. And when something does hit, you don't know where that came from. What would you say what you had just said then? Would you apply to somebody perhaps who has a low budget currently for marketing? Would you suggest maybe that's a good tactic? The starting off in Kindle Unlimited and then seeing how it progresses?
Yeah, it simplifies a lot of things. So you can focus your time and attention on just one platform. You can do things like the free runs where you can do those totally for free, or maybe you book some promotional newsletters, which are just emails that are sent out with discounted books. You pay $20 or $50 to have your book included on a certain date, and they send it out. That can be a good way to get the ball rolling. Amazon does provide visibility to Kindle Unlimited books because every borrow in Kindle Unlimited counts the same as a sale in their sales rank algorithm, which means that it's much less friction to borrow a book with your membership than to buy it for $3.99, $4.99. So you can generate a lot of borrows, and that can not just translate into page reads, but also into greater visibility on the store. So if your budget is limited or you're just starting out, Kindle Unlimited is a good place to get your feet wet, and you can use some of Amazon's tools. The other thing that you can apply for is Prime Reading and see if your book is accepted for that. They have Kindle deals as well that you can apply for. So it's a good place to start, and it will grow with you as well. You can spend very low amounts of money to nothing to tens of thousands of dollars. And those are different games in that obviously at the lower end, you're not spending that amount of money, but you also shouldn't be trying to compete and expecting to get to the top 100 in the store or top 500 in the store. You have to use your resources to get as much for your ad dollars and your marketing budget as possible. Whereas at the top, a lot of times you're just buying visibility with the hope that it's going to translate into Amazon sending out emails, Amazon sending out recommendations, and just that ad spend is going to pay off. Where if you're in the top 100 for a while, then you're going to see this increase in overall profitability from just the sheer visibility and volume that you're doing.
What would you what advice would you give? So copyright is a huge thing. So obviously we've written the book, and as you were saying before, it's very important to make sure that you have the right cover for the market. You know what genre you're in, and also the blurb. I know a lot of people have issues with blurbs because it's very difficult to summarize, a book on the back in a couple of paragraphs. What would your advice be in regards to that?
Yeah, the easiest way to do it is go to your subgenres, top 100, type in Kindle top 100 bestsellers, and then your genre. So let's say urban fantasy. And sometimes the books are in a different subgenre. So, for example, urban fantasy is dominated by a lot of things that aren't urban fantasy, and the top of it is pretty much staked out by Harry Potter. So, indies, to get some visibility, list a lot of their urban fantasy stuff in dark fantasy, which you'll learn as you get more familiar with your genre. But go to the genre and then start clicking on the books, reading their blurbs. And what I would recommend is hand copying the blurb if it resonates with you and makes you want to buy the book. And if you do that for 30 straight days and break them down, then you're going to have a tremendous understanding of what readers expect and how to write a blurb in your genre. So the approach that I would recommend is you take 7 minutes, you hand copy the blurb, and it's really important that you hand copy it rather than type it out. And then you write your own blurb. And that is pretty much it. You set a timer for 7 minutes for writing your own blurb, and you're going to write some really bad stuff. But what you'll find as you start accumulating these is there are pieces that you can use, and also you're pushing against the edges of your comfort zone and your own abilities. The blurbs that you hand copy are not going to be similar to your own style a lot of the time, and that's good. Some of them won't be a fit, but some of them will unlock new ideas that you can then apply to your own work. There's an almost infinite number of ways that you can pitch your own book, and we get trapped in the same one or two, and this is one of the best ways that you can break out of that and not only learn a skill that's going to stick with you long term. It's not ephemeral. It doesn't change. It's not like Facebook ads where you have to keep learning and keep up to date with the latest things that have adjusted on the platform. Once you have this and once you understand how to write a blurb, you can do it today, you can do it 2 years from now, and that only takes about 15 minutes, 20 minutes a day, but it's one of the most powerful things you can do, not just for the blurb, but also going back to our discussion about genre. You understand the genre because you're writing things down and you see, okay, in the urban fantasy blurbs, we're seeing mentions about wizards and vampires and this type of language. It has this type of tone where it's somewhat sarcastic. A lot of them are in the first person, which may not have immediately occurred to you to write it in the first person. Maybe you're writing in the third person. All these things, they really become part of your toolbox, and then you can use that to craft your own blurb. Another thing that's helpful is looking outside your genre. You don't necessarily have to hand copy 30 blurbs in your own genre. You can look at other genres, and you might not write romance, but romance is a great one to look at because it's so competitive marketing wise. The blurbs and the covers have to be so sharp, so you can learn a lot from studying romance authors. Thrillers, especially ones published by Thomas and Mercer, which is Amazon's imprint, the blurbs for those are really sharp. I think they probably have a professional copywriter or professional copywriters pen those, and it really shows. So check some of those out as well, and you can draw in elements from them and apply them to your own genre.
What would you say 3 common things that authors don't realize or resources are available to them when they come into this? So, for example, probably about a year ago, I had just realized that you can have up to 10 categories on both ebook and book, and it blew my mind. I've been doing this for 7 years now, and I didn't know that. So, what would you say 3 things are that authors probably don't know about that really, really helps them in regards to, ranking and getting those sales?
I'd say most of it comes down to the book. So the thing I tell people is people don't listen to music that they don't like. You might not like a band. A lot of people might not like a band, and they might get a lot of flack, but there are fans out there. And if people are reading your books and coming back, that means that they like them. So overlooking that, you definitely don't want to look beyond the product itself and think that there's some sort of marketing technique there. The second is genre. So I know that these aren't necessarily anything to do with the Kindle store per se, but Amazon's really built to reward books that readers like. It's a very customer centric experience. If you can deliver a product that readers like and that they're recommending to their friends via word of mouth, that they're getting to the end of and then buying the next books, that solves basically every problem you have, as long as you're getting the books visible in some way. The third thing that a lot of people overlook is that writing is such a solitary pursuit that it seems like you have to do everything yourself. Not only can you outsource a lot of things, but the community is really, really helpful in the indie world. And if you're on an island by yourself, it can feel overwhelming or lonely, but it can also be confusing in that you don't necessarily know what the next step is to take. There are a lot of communities out there of authors who are doing this, who have experience and are willing to share their knowledge with people. And it's not all paid courses or books that you have to read or things like that. There's a lot of good information out there, and that's applicable not only if you're just starting out and don't really have a lot of money to play with, to learn and to market, but also it's useful when you're selling 5,000 or 10,000, 15,000 books a month. You still learn things from other people because there's only so much you can test on your own, even if you're doing the marketing essentially full time, which is what I do. There's still things that I pick up from there. So the community is tremendously helpful and is willing to share a lot of information.
I want to talk a little bit more about you now. Sorry, I just went on an entourage of a whole pile of different questions.
It's good.
Tell me about Ashes of the Fall. That was one that grabbed my attention. I must confess, it's not a genre I would usually read, but I'm a little bit intrigued. So, can you tell us a little bit about that and what gave you the inspiration for that series?
I like stuff like The Matrix or things of that nature. So it's not exactly like that. It's a post-apocalyptic book, but certainly from watching movies of that nature, that's where it largely comes from. So
Amazing. What has been your favorite book to write so far and why?
I actually like the writing the marketing book because there's so much stuff out there. It's good that everybody shares stuff, but also it can be really overwhelming. So if you have all these notes and all these things to do, just getting that into a format that I could read through and be like, okay, these are some things that I've done. Maybe these are some things that I've done and I should be doing more of. Like it acts as kind of a checklist for me as well. And for the fiction side, maybe Ashes of the Fall. I actually liked writing the follow-up to that because I wrote it in about 5-6 days because of a deadline to do the pre-order. And sometimes with those constraints, you learn interesting things about yourself. I had to cut down a lot of the plots that I was planning or maybe wanted to incorporate. So sometimes I have this scope for the book that just exceeds what the word count is. And I tend to write shorter, so you can only put so much plot and things like that in the book. But that deadline really made me focus on that. So it's just one very continuous kind of linear narrative. And I think that it ended up flowing pretty well after I read it again a couple of years ago. And I was surprised at how well that turned out, because you have an idea after you finish it. You're like, no, this is terrible. This isn't what I wanted to do. And I think that ended up being significantly better than the first book because of those constraints actually, which was surprising to me.
I think a lot of authors do that. They think it's the worst, most garbage thing they've ever read, but then they'll go away from it for a while, come back and go, oh, wow, that was actually a pretty good line. Oh, look at me go. Um, what would you say the most surprising thing has been for you in this industry that you have found that you didn't expect?
Probably the level of difficulty. And I don't want to discourage anybody who's just starting out, but it's hard to make a living doing this, and it's hard to make a significant amount of money. Certainly there are people who are making a lot of money, but it tends to be very concentrated, where 0.1% of the books are earning 80-90% of the revenue, which is an extreme application of the 80-20 rule, which is the 20% of the inputs generate 80% of the outputs. So it's very top heavy in that regard a lot of the time. And certainly you can write things that get a readership and can build a fan base, but it takes a lot of grinding, and it's a long game for most people because you're competing against not just indie authors in your genre who have been writing for a while, but you're also competing for shelf space against Stephen King and all these other authors who have been writing for 30, 40 years who are excellent at their craft. And there needs to be some sort of acknowledgement of that at the beginning, right? That, okay, this is pretty difficult, while also completely disregarding it and ignoring it, because it can be so intimidating if you really stop and think about it that you might not start. You just have to put the books out there and see where they fall. But that's certainly something that I didn't really grasp until a few years in. There are so many moving parts. And the other thing is, as an indie author, you have to wear a lot of different hats, and you have to get good at multiple different things. It's not just enough to be good at the craft. You have to figure out how to package it in a way that readers will respond to and buy.
What would you say for you personally, what has been your greatest challenge and your greatest accomplishment so far in your career?
It's a good question. Challenges, I think at the beginning I would focus too much on the book that I just had written and try to market that. Whereas if you just have a short memory, regardless of whether things are good or bad, and moving on to the next book, then that's going to serve you better, because you need that backlist, you need that catalog to really hit critical mass and make money. So you can't do that if you're living in the past, whether that was good or bad. Certainly market your backlist that responds well to marketing. Ignore the books that don't respond well to marketing. Shouldn't be spending a lot of time pushing those. But just having that short memory and going on to the next book, whether that's the second book in the series or a new series, if that one's wrapped up, that's really important, and that's challenging, getting better at that. Greatest accomplishment, I think it's the same thing where you kind of have to let things go a little bit. At the same time, the failures always loom larger, and sometimes you can discount your accomplishments. So it can be helpful to celebrate those. I think just working with a variety of different authors and the experiences there, I've helped a few authors build to six figures. So that's been extremely satisfying and good experience that I'm proud of there. Launching some books into the top 100 for people and seeing their reaction and seeing how that's changed their career is obviously really cool as well. So that'd be my answer.
You should absolutely be proud of that. That's amazing. One of the authors you work with is Lisa Vino. So she's actually how I came across you. In that group, she is currently aiming for the USA list for her recent book, and she couldn't speak highly enough of you. So I'm curious, for those who may be watching, what is your process like when you are considering taking on a new client? How would you evaluate them and go, okay, this is how we would move forward, what would your considerations be in regards to a package for them?
The number one thing is if I think there's a realistic chance that I can get them results. There's no guarantee, and there's no way of knowing that until you actually touch the ads and start working on them. But you can tell from the way things are branded, also the things that I've worked on in the past, my strategies, those tend to work better for series. It's a lot easier to market series with ads profitably than if you're doing a standalone. Certainly I've done some standalones before that have been successful, but there's just more risk there because you don't have anything to read afterward a lot of the time. So you'd want a standalone that had some sort of link to another standalone or a series or something like that. And that usually works more effectively with the ads. So that's the first thing that I would look at. And then the second thing is really how much they're trying to spend. It doesn't make a lot of sense a lot of times to hire an ads person. It's going to be difficult for them to get results if your spend is relatively low. And I know people want to outsource this really badly because it takes a lot of time, it's difficult, and I 100% get that, but usually you're going to be better served doing it yourself unless your main skill is the writing and you're just going to be way better off writing because that's so high leverage, or doing some other form of marketing. Some authors are really engaging on social media or something else and they're looking for a complement to what they're doing. But a lot of times it's going to be better to learn the ad platforms yourself. And you certainly want to have an understanding of what's going on so that you can communicate with your ads person so that you know what they're telling you is legit or not. And that's something that I look at, like, is this a good fit from a budgetary standpoint? Can you get a return on that? Does it make sense to run your ads, or are you doing a good job already? A lot of people, again, you're on an island and you don't see that data. Even if you're in the groups, you don't see behind the curtain. You only see what people post. The advantage of what I have is I've worked with so many people and I've seen all the dashboards and seen the actual raw data. So I know where things should be coming in certain genres and what's good and where I can adjust things to hopefully improve it. And sometimes there's not a whole lot of room for improvement, or my strategy is not going to necessarily be an improvement over what they're already doing. And in that case, if you already know what you're doing, then you can just keep running the ads and going, and you don't need to necessarily outsource it. But it could be beneficial in that case because you want to free up time for writing or something that's higher ROI. You get to a point in your career where writing the next book is almost always the highest return marketing wise. So there's a middle point where the ads a lot of time are higher leverage, but once you're at the maybe like top 20 or top 50 of your genre, if it's something like romance or thriller or top 100, then it can be beneficial just to take that off your plate, even if you're really effective at it. So there are a lot of considerations that go into it. I'd really recommend for people to try to learn it themselves, and don't expect it to take a month or two. I would say that analysis is one of my strong suits. I'm willing to test a lot of different things. It took me basically a year plus to be comfortable with Facebook ads. And even then, it took time to get that to be more consistent and work in a variety of genres. And you just have to be patient and keep testing. So it's a long game, and all the courses, all the info from the ad platforms themselves, a lot of the time they're going to portray it as a way to get customers, or in our case, readers, immediately, which is a good marketing pitch, and occasionally it's true, but usually it's something that you have to work for. And if you're expecting to put up a couple ads and immediately see this spike in sales. That's not usually the case. It's usually the opposite, where you spend a bunch of money and you don't get anything for it. And that's where most people quit. But if you can move through that, then you can get a lot better, and that'll save you money on the ads manager. But more importantly than that, it's more likely that you're the person most invested in your own career. Even if your ads manager really, really cares, it's unlikely that they're going to be as focused on your career as you are, because they're your books. This is your life. And thus, if you can control that aspect of it, then a lot of times you're going to be the best candidate for that job.
We are going to have a segment. So it is called Speed Dating with an Author. So I lit a candle. I'm very romantic that way. So basically it's 5 rapid questions. So the first one is, what is the clumsiest moment you ever had?
No, there's a lot of times where you say something and you're like, I didn't want to say that. It would be hard to choose one. I have a thing where I say something and then maybe it's not applicable in 6 months since this industry changes, and then I kind of wince when I hear that. So it's hard to select one, just constantly trying to improve.
Yeah, I'll take that as an answer. What are the 3 words that best describe you?
I'd say you got to choose the right ones, right? You can't just heap praise on yourself. Got to hit a nice middle ground here. I'd say contrarian. That's always been kind of a character trait. I'd say focused on the truth. I don't know. That's a lot of words. Focused is definitely one of them, where I have really sharp focus. And then questioning, where I won't take any answer necessarily at face value, which can be good, can also be bad, in that I'm going over a lot of ground that doesn't necessarily need to be covered by me, since it's been covered by other people. But a lot of times I'm digging into the why.
What is the song that would best describe you?
Yeah, I read this question beforehand, and I don't have an answer. I can give you a couple of
What's your favorite song then?
my favorites. I like Under the Bridge by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I like Slow Dancing in a Burning Room by John Mayer. So anything that kind of has this ambiance, where it has a feeling coming out of the speakers that is congruent with the song and evokes that emotion, is pretty powerful. So, it feels to me, I play guitar, so it feels to me when you're listening to something like Slow Dancing in a Burning Room that there's smoke coming through the speakers. And John Mayer said something one time about, he was describing Stevie Ray Vaughan, who's another famous guitar player, and he described it, his guitar tone, as sounding something like liquid mercury. And I always thought that was interesting, as not just a guitar player, but as an artist. Like, what kind of feeling and emotion are you trying to evoke from the reader? Because there are those songs and books where it's more than the sum of its parts, and it has this magical aura to it. And that's always cool when you come across those.
Are you in a band? How good of a guitar player are we talking?
I have never been in a band. I guess that depends. I don't know. It's the same thing with writing. I feel like it's the same thing in any art. Sometimes you feel like you're really on fire and can take on anything, and then there are always gaps in your playing. So then you see something really basic and you're like, that's easy. And then 30 minutes later, you're like, man, I got to practice a lot more. So it depends on what day you catch me on, how confident that answer is going to be.
So there's no TikTok account with your videos playing the guitar or anything like that?
No, it's just, that's really, what that's been really helpful for me is learning how to learn, because with an instrument you have to practice, and it's so time consuming and so long term, in that if you practice for 5 hours a day for a week, at the end of the week, you're still not significantly better. And it's good for setting expectations in other areas, because you can write a book in a week, but it's not necessarily going to propel you craft wise to the next level. So they're kind of similar that way. It's just a long process.
What is your life motto?
I don't necessarily have one. I mean, my life motto, I guess, then is strong beliefs, loosely held. You want to be very flexible, but committed enough in the moment to actually take action. Otherwise, you can bend to the whims of whoever's around you or whatever tactic is popular right now. So you have to be confident enough to stay the course, and also have that same confidence to know when it's time to shift.
What is a unique talent or skill set that you have that not many people know about?
Maybe the guitar playing. I don't mention that much. I used to trade stocks, so that's something that I haven't talked about all that much. Maybe one of those two.
I have had an absolute amazing time. You've answered so many brilliant questions. Well, the answers were brilliant, not the questions. But where do we find you? Where do we find all this information, and where do we find your books? Where do we stalk you, basically?
You can find my books on Amazon and other retailers at Nicholas Erik. That's Eric with a K. For authors, I've written The Ultimate Guide to Book Marketing, so you can check that out. If you want to learn more about the marketing stuff, you can check out nicholaserik.com, and I have some free resources for authors. I have a sometimes weekly newsletter that you can sign up for. If you want to check out the fiction stuff, there are a couple books on the site, but I mainly write urban fantasy at this point, which is under dnerickson.com, and also on Amazon, currently in Kindle Unlimited, but that's all fluid. So maybe in the future that will shift back to wide. We'll see, but right now on Amazon.
Well, I have had such a good time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. And who knows, hopefully in a couple of months, maybe I'll be able to convince you to come back on.
Yeah.
You'll be like, absolutely not. No, I'm kidding. Well,
Let's do it.
Awesome. Have a good one, and I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.